Valheim, a beautiful game where you make progress by gearing up and defeating tough bosses. There's Eikthyr, the Elder, Bone Mass, Mater, Yagluth, and the Queen. These are the apex predators of Valheim, but can you defeat them all while trolls spawn right next to you every couple seconds? You see, trolls are the very first mob you encounter that strike fear into the hearts of new players. Trolls are an initiation ritual for newcomers' anxiety. They like to hang out in the eerie Black Forest biome and occasionally decide to pay your peaceful meadows base a not so peaceful visit. They're a destructive force of nature and have a knack for wrecking things as if it's an art form, which doesn't sit well with new players or seasoned veterans who painstakingly built their stuff. So let's break down this challenge. The game has 6 bosses, and my mission? Defeat them all. Here's how it goes. First boss, a troll pops in every 60 seconds. Second round, 1 troll every 50 seconds. Then the tempo picks up even more. 40, 30, 15 seconds for the next bosses. And just for kicks, the final boss showdown will crank it up to 1 troll every single second. And just to put things in perspective, that's 60 trolls a minute. With my only rule being is that I can only use the best gear and weapons available for that specific boss I'm fighting. For example, I can't use the iron armor or black metal weapons for Eikthyr, since the best tier of gear I can get in the meadows is bronze. And so, with this in mind, I have to be very strategic in my choices of which bosses I fight first. Because if I choose the order poorly, it can make the later fights pretty much impossible to win. I mean, imagine trying to beat a tanky boss like Mater, who spends half the fight in the air while 60 trolls spawn every minute. Yeah, exactly. That's not happening. And so, with that in mind, I decided that my very first fight would be against the King of the Plains, Yagluth. Yagluth would be my first boss, and I chose to go with the full Fenris armor set paired with the Froster and Draugr Fangbow for my weapons, along with a black metal shield. Now, I did debate between taking on Bone Mass or Yagluth as my first boss, but I eventually settled on Yagluth. My reasoning was that I wasn't entirely sure on what to anticipate with this type of challenge, and I figured it was a good middle of the road kind of fight. I chose this setup in particular because this fight typically involves a lot of running and rolling around to dodge Yagluth's attacks, as well as managing the plains dwelling mobs that love to stick their noses where they don't belong. Introducing trolls to this equation would amplify the need for movement, making stamina management a serious problem. And that is the reason I chose the Fenris armor set. This armor holds a special place in my heart due to its 9% movement speed bonus when worn as a complete set. Its only drawback being that it doesn't give much defensive bonuses, but it does offer fire resistance, which is actually perfect for Yagluth because it counters his fire-based assaults. And the choice for bringing the Frostner weapon was a strategic one, because not only does it offer a solid damage output on its own, but it also inflicts frost damage, which is great for slowing down enemies. And there was going to be a lot of them in this area, as the Yagluth Shrine was unfortunately located right next to a giant fueling village. Now, even though Yagluth is one of the tougher bosses in the game, the fight itself was going pretty smoothly, until I accidentally alerted the fueling village, which immediately complicated things and forced me to think on the spot. You see, taking them out proved to be very difficult with everything going on. So I had this bright idea of leading them away, but in my attempt to flee, I aggroed some locks, and then on top of that, the timer ticked up to 60 seconds, which, as you know, made the troll spawn. And this was the moment that made me realize that the enemy of my enemy is actually my friend. Because the trolls were apparently a much bigger priority for the fuelings than I was, and they all ganged up on him. So now, instead of these trolls being a hindrance, they became a strategic asset in this fight. I could use them as a distraction against the mobs in the area and get back to the task at hand of fighting the big bad boss. Of course, this was much easier said than done because, to be honest, the trolls were taken out very quickly by these powerful little gremlings. But hey, it was better than nothing, because at least it solved the problem of me having to deal with them myself. So that was pretty much how the fight went down. The whole fight consisted of me trying to juggle the fuelings, trolls, Deathsquitos, and trying to get my damage in on Yagluth when I could. The fight itself lasted around 12 minutes from the time I summoned Yagluth to the moment I took my last swing. All in all, it wasn't actually too bad of a fight, but it did make me reconsider the order of the next couple boss fights. For the next fight, I decided to go with the Elder, and I just went with the tankiest armor available in this biome, which was full bronze. And for the weapon, a simple bronze axe. Originally, I was thinking of taking on some of the harder bosses earlier because obviously the trolls were my main concern. But after that last fight, I realized that since I could use the enemies as a distraction, I needed to take out the Elder as soon as possible before the troll spawn timer got way too low. Reason being is that the Black Forest biome in which the Elder is located is home to the trolls, meaning that the mobs here see the trolls as allies and will team up with one another to take me down. Remember, I am all alone here, and on top of that, the bronze tier weaponry won't be fast enough to take out the trolls before more spawn in, which would result in me being overrun. So I had to take on the Elder while I still had the chance. As for the fight itself, I just dove right in, tanking what I could, and put all my focus into dealing as much damage before too many trolls spawned in. I finished the fight in a little over 2 minutes, and with just 2 trolls being almost too much to handle, I knew that I made the correct choice. And with that threat dissolved, now is where things could get a little bit tricky. This next choice was a tough one. The rate at which the trolls were spawning was getting very dangerous. I decided it was time to fight the putrid green blob, Bone Mass. For the gear, I went with full tank, and picked iron armor, an iron mace, stag breaker, and the iron tower shield for max defense. My thought process behind picking Bone Mass was pretty simple. While yes, taking out the harder bosses would be easier with less trolls, the problem is that the lower tier armor would ultimately be my downfall with the amount of trolls spawning in later on. So the strategy for Bone Mass was the same as the one I had for the Elder. My plan was to just bum rush him and take him out as fast as possible while pretty much just ignoring the trolls. I had a sneaking suspicion that this would probably be the last time that a strategy such as this would be viable. The reason this works on Bone Mass, even though he's significantly harder than the Elder, is because of his fat gelatinous body. And look, this isn't me trying to fat shame him. All I meant by that is that I can use him as a barrier against myself and the trolls, as well as the various enemies Bone Mass throws in to buy me more time to get my swings in, which made this strategy possible. The fight went pretty well, all things considered, and I even managed to finish him off with my fist for some style points. That's 3 bosses down and only 3 to go, with the last 3 having trolls spawn in every 30 seconds, 15 seconds, and of course, every single second for the finale. The Queen was my next choice, and the one I was most worried about. Being the new boss in the game, she was definitely one of the hardest. Her attacks are powerful, she summons seeker soldiers very often, spews maggots out of her mouth, and on top of all this, she plays this annoying game of hide and seek in the mist, jump scaring you with sneak attacks out of nowhere. And that's just a standard fight. Now I gotta deal with trolls popping up every 30 seconds as well. So unfortunately, I couldn't put her off any longer. Honestly, looking back at it, I probably should have tackled this fight right off the bat, because oh boy, did I struggle. I started off my attempts going with a full magic build. Magic robes, frost staff, dead razor, protective barrier spells, the whole shebang. Going into this fight, I thought that I could maybe ignore the trolls completely and focus on the Queen while they fought the bugs, but there was just way too much going on for me to handle. The trolls kept spawning in my way, and the dungeon was way too small for me to maneuver around. And I couldn't take them out fast enough with the spells due to each cast taking up so much of my Eater reserves. I also ended up sacrificing a huge chunk of my health and stamina just to use the magic, which, as you can tell, didn't really help the situation. And after many attempts, I realized that I had to try something else, because this was just not working. So I tried a new approach and changed up my gear just a bit. I still went with the full magic gear setup, but this time I had a trick up my sleeve. And I already know I'm gonna butcher this, but the Him and Apple polearm. This polearm was the key to the puzzle, because its main use would be to take out the trolls. You see, because it's such a high tier weapon, only available from resources found in the Mistlands, it dealt an insane amount of damage to the trolls. With this new weapon, it took only 2 to 3 attacks to take out a troll from the moment they spawn, giving me just enough breathing room to fight the Queen. As for the Queen, I would still be using my Staff of Embers for those long range attacks, and the Dead Razor Staff for the skeleton companions to help me out, because God only knows how much I needed someone on my side for this battle. And of course, I'd still be using that protective barrier for that little bit of extra safety. Now, don't get me wrong, this did not make the fight easy by any means, but it did make it manageable, which was all I could ask for at this point. And so, I went full on sweat mode, kiting the boss around and getting those licks in while I could, while keeping the constantly spawning trolls at bay. Every now and then leaving one alive to deal with the never-ending flow of seekers around me, and trying to manage my health, stamina, and Eater reserves. Finally, after around 8 minutes, which felt like forever, of playing murderous hide and seek in the most annoying biome with the Queen, I dealt my final blow. But there was no time to celebrate, because with that final blow, it was time to face the second to last boss, with a troll spawning in every 15 seconds. With my next choice being between Mater and Ecthyr, I realized that my only real option was the Mother of all dragons. Because, well, the final boss is gonna have a troll spawning literally every second. And to be fair, I don't even know if that's possible even with the best gear and weapons in the game. But I would cross that bridge when I come to it. Because for now, I had to think of a way to take out a flying boss who spends half the time in the air, leaving me to deal with these annoying ass trolls every 15 seconds. For my gear, I decided on the Root Armor set, which gave a plus 15 stat bonus to the bow skill. I was hoping this would help me out a lot since Mater would be in the air most of this fight. And that armor, combined with the weapon I chose, which was the Draugr Fang, aka the second best bow in the game, would hopefully be enough to get me through this fight. I also brought along the Silver Sword to help out against the trolls, and to use against Mater in close combat when she lands. On my first few attempts, it didn't go too well. You see, the trolls were spawning at an alarmingly rapid pace, leaving me little to no time to shoot my shots. And things just kept getting out of hand. After a few attempts, it was clear to me that unless I found a way to take them out as soon as they spawned, this fight would be at a stalemate. So I came up with a new plan of action, which was to make the trolls my top priority. Since getting overrun was what was holding me back, I decided not to focus too heavily on the Silver Sword and stand my ground while camping the Draugr Fang, which actually worked out surprisingly well. This strategy allowed me to stay a safe distance away from Mater's attacks, because she seemed to get kind of janky when she lands, and just kind of stood there glaring at me and not doing anything while I pelted her in the face with arrows. And as for the trolls, well, they spawned right in front of me while I was shooting a constant stream of arrows. And because they spawned right in front of my attacks, it actually made them stun for a second, which did twice as much damage and allowed me to finish them off in only 2 to 3 hits once again. So, for this fight, I focused on the trolls while she was in the air, and ran a safe distance away when she landed to shoot my shots. I was slowly and carefully whittling down her health until she finally died. I ran over to pick up her head as a trophy and prepared for the hardest fight against the easiest boss in the game, the deer boss Eikthyr. 1 troll every second. That's 60 trolls a minute. Would this even be possible? Well, to be quite frank with you, nah, absolutely not. At least not normally. I had to seriously think of some weird, out-of-the-box way to wrap up this challenge because there's no way in hell I'm ending this on a fail after all of this. But regardless of what I came up with, I knew that I had to end this challenge with full troll hide armor as my gear of choice. So, I began to theory craft and experiment. First thing I did was I tried to build platforms to stand on, hoping that the trolls would spawn and fall down, giving me a chance at sniping the boss, but unfortunately that failed. The trolls were spawning at such a rapid pace that they ended up pushing me off as well as stacking up way too high, which allowed them to reach me. And even the ones at the bottom kind of ruined this idea because they were damaging the support. I then thought of maybe ranging Eikthyr from a raft, thinking that maybe the trolls would sink to the bottom of the ocean as soon as they spawned. But unfortunately that also didn't work because they spawned on the raft. And besides, the ocean floor was way too shallow for this to work for those that did fall off. But then I tried something that finally had some potential. You see, after hundreds of hours of playing this game, I know just how buggy and glitchy it can get. So I got the idea of digging myself into a hole under the small altar to see if I could position myself just low enough so that the troll attacks miss. I tested this out and voila, it worked. They did get some damage in every now and then, but not enough to outright kill me. But there was still the question of how to actually defeat Eikthyr. I mean, staying alive was great and all, and definitely a step in the right direction, but I still had to beat the boss. So I grabbed myself the Stag Breaker, which is a 2-handed weapon that deals AoE damage, and I spawned in the boss. My strategy was to just swing it wildly all over the place and hope that Eikthyr gets jammed up right next to me in the midst of the chaos. The thing is, I was kind of on a deadline, because my FPS was rapidly dropping at an alarming pace. I could maybe keep this up for 4, maybe 5 minutes before my game crashed. So, I swung my 2-handed hammer like my life depended on it, praying that the boss got within range. And after almost 3 minutes, I finally won. I didn't actually see him die, but his giant health bar got down to 0, which is a win in my book at this point. The challenge was completed. I did try to run back after getting out of there to pick up my trophy, but as you can see, I just wasn't able to get around the 300 or so trolls guarding the area. And at this point, I'm pretty sure that this is their home now. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you soon.